for that. So you all are the guinea pigs, okay?
Yeah.
So, to start out with a little bit about myself. I grew up in St. Thomas. I left for college and basically never came back. Became a physician. Ended up in Minnesota, where I'm at now. Yes, I see the shivering out there. It was 11 below when I left yesterday, so yes, welcome home. And so, you know, I grew up here and left, but I've always kind of been coming back. And early on, I picked up the love for the family history with talking mainly with my grandmother, Verna Dinzey. We'll go through some things with her family and such. So right now I've been in a position 25 years in Minnesota. Many of you know my mother, Dante Beretta. In the snap shop, photographer for many, many years here. 45, okay. So I don't know how you manage the math, because I don't know when the shop closed.
I'm 51.
It's now the knitting day.
When everyone started taking
snapshot
pictures
is-
with their phones.
Yeah, so the snap shop is the knitting den. So, my father, George Beretta, passed away in 2013. And really this is going to be the story about his family. And we'll start. So first off, the topic, Beretta and Dinzey, our cross-cultural Thomaian family. This is kind of the crazy quilt of my island family. You know, Sophia wrote to me and said, you know, you should present something, and I kind of threw a couple of ideas out there. And she said, well, why don't you do a story about your family, because your family's history mirrors the island's history. And I thought, that's good. Nice, small topic. So we figured I have to kind of narrow this down a little bit. And this doesn't present well, but yeah, if we can go with the lights. But the graphic is just for the graphic anyways. So this is my father, George Antonio Beretta. We'll have some better pictures. My grandmother, Verna Dinzey. My grandfather, Giorgio Antonio Beretta. And what I decided to do was, I couldn't cover all of this, but I looked at things and I said, you know, his paternal line, so just following through the Berettas, I know back to this guy here, Antonio Beretta, the Italian. And I figured that that story would be kind of nice to give. And focusing really on the merchant history of the Berettas. And really kind of focusing more on their store, their Main Street store, because there's all kinds of other things. And we're going to be going all kinds of different paths or whatever it is. But just bear with me. And then I decided as well to go just a straight maternal line. And the reason why I did that was I thought it would, this is a family that I've been able to get some research back to St. Croix. This lady here, I'm going to concentrate on her, Lydia Michaels, born in about 1829 or 1830 in St. Croix. And so I thought that this family really kind of represented just following the maternal line down. And there's a couple reasons why I want to look at that. Because one of the things I call this a matrilineal family. It wasn't a matrilineal society, but in the family units, the woman was the head of the household. They took care of raising the kids. They worked. You know, and so this is a pattern that repeats through the 4 generations, and we'll kind of go through some things with that. Everybody else here, we might mention 1 or 2 things, but we're kind of ignoring them for now. Not that they don't have great stories, but we just have the time limitations, and I thought that going with the maternal line and the paternal line would be pretty good story to kind of show the different cultures. Okay. So, this is my paternal grandparents. And he actually went by George as well, but his name in the baptism record, Giorgio Antonio Beretta. He was born in 1885, died in 1931. My father barely knew him. He died when my father was two and a half. So we really don't have any of the oral history on that side, at least for my grandfather. This is my grandmother, Verna Dinzey, and she was born in 1907 and died in 1991. So I knew very well. I like to think that I was her favorite grandchild. I used to talk a lot with her about family history, and she really didn't know much because her father died when she was just 5. So she really didn't know that Dinzey line. Her mother, though, lived with her. Her mother died in, I think, 62?
Yeah, I think Barbara was a year old, yeah.
Yeah. So, she knew her mother very well and got a little bit of history, just knew about her grandparents because all of her grandparents, by the time she was born, they were dead. So she knew none of her grandparents. So a little sparse oral history, and we'll come back to that. Okay, so let's start. So this quote says, "If you cannot get rid of the family skeleton, you may as well make it dance." Okay, so George Bernard Shaw, he's got a lot of good quotes. I like to clip quotes, so this is one I thought, okay, that's appropriate. Okay, so let's dance. This is my immigrant Italian ancestor. So this part is the story about the Berettas, the Italian merchant family. So this is Giorgio Giuseppe Natal Beretta. He is from Santa Margherita, Italy, and it's a small town about 10 miles away from Genoa. And Genoa is a big trading port, and a lot of merchants come out of this area. And we have a small group of immigrants from the Genoa area and Santa Margherita Liguri that come to St. Thomas in the mid-1800s. We're talking like the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s.
Down at the alley and stuff.
Yeah. So, born in 1842. I don't know much about his parents except I know their name, Antonio Beretta and Rosa De Panci. There's, the oral history, I think, comes from my great uncle Nato. Says that he left for Sicily and then the family got him back. I do know that he was in the military in Italy. And in Italy at that time, it was not Italy as we know it today. It was a number of different city-states, states. And so he was actually part of that unification campaign. And I'm blanking on the name, but Garibaldi, thank you. There's my brain fart going here. But Garibaldi. And so he was conscripted. Did a couple years in the Italian military, 1862, 1863, and I'm not sure when exactly he came to St. Thomas, but I'm figuring about 1867. That's what his obituary said, but again, that's how many years after. He died in 1912, so this is what they said. He was in the island for 45 years. We figure about 1867. So this document up here is a Bürgerbrief. What's the English term for that? Anybody? Bürgerbrief, right. So this is August 20th, 1867. And if you look at the signature there, that's his signature. If you look at the Burger Brief records, at the very beginning of it, it's like a license to do business, this Burger Brief, but it's also a citizenship and it's a loyalty thing. And so there's an oath to the king. Was it King Christian IX, I think. So that's his signature. And then somebody else has written in Danish, born in Italy, Burger Brief, as a detail handler, merchant. So this is 1867 already. And the family history is, we think he immigrated in 1867, but my great-uncle Nato said 1861. So there's some question, but I don't think that date is right because he was in the military in between. But at any rate, this is the first record that I have. I have one other travel record where he's coming in from Vieques, but I think that's just this is from June of this year. I think that's simply that he was on a business trip. So, to put it in context, what else happened in 1867 in St. Thomas?
Earthquake and tsunami and hurricane.
Hurricane.
People.
And one other thing a couple other things that I'll talk about. So, so this is the hurricane. This is a couple days after the hurricane. This was printed in a London newspaper afterwards. But we go to January. This is the end of the epidemics: the smallpox, yellow fever, cholera. This is not a great place to visit right now. And in another line, I have a child who's like 4 years old who died of cholera in this epidemic. That's in a different line that goes back further in St. Thomas. We talked about the hurricane. Before the hurricane, I think it was a week or two, I think 2 weeks before, Seward, who was the Secretary of State of the U.S., had come down ostensibly to recover from his wounds in the assassination attempt. So when they assassinated Lincoln, they basically tried to take out the government. And so the Secretary of State, Seward, was in that. And so afterwards, so this is that was in 1865, Lincoln is shot. And so he comes down, Seward comes down for basically kind of R&R, but he's really here to negotiate and see about the U.S. purchasing the islands. So that's happening. And the reason why I bring that up is I have another line where they name one of the kids Seward. Seward Dinzey. And that's what he's known as. What are they thinking? They're pro-American. They're pro the sale to America. That same line actually named one of their children Abraham Lincoln Dinzey. And they called him Lincoln. That was 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation in the U.S. And so later that year in 1863, they had a kid, Abraham Lincoln Dinzey. So, one of the cousins. Okay, so, and I will go kind of all off on different trails or whatever. You want to kick me back, whatever. Okay, so this is a slide about Giorgio Beretta, his first store. So the oral history from my great uncle says his store was a block west of Main Street. So this is Crown Princeton's Gata number 7 and 8. I just went down there this morning. It's been a parking lot since I was a kid. So the building isn't there anymore. But here, Giorgio Beretta lists himself as a merchant, and notice the signature? I probably have a pointer here, don't I? It's the same signature on his Burger Brief. So a lot of times they had the person fill out the form. They brought it by however many days before, and census day is X. We're going to come by and pick up the forms. If you haven't filled them out, we're going to enumerate. So here he is. So we got Giorgio Beretta, we have Nicola Beretta, Vincenzo Beretta, and then Antonio Anton Mattei. So the this is Giorgio is a bachelor. He's a merchant, and his two brothers are clerks. I think by this time Antonio, the father, had died, and the brothers basically came out, and so it's a business of the Beretta brothers. The name of the business, Beretta Hermanos. Why not Beretta Fratelli? Fratelli is the Italian word for brothers. It's because I think they did a lot of their business in Spanish. They went to Santo Domingo a lot, and eventually he set up businesses in Santo Domingo. So a lot of it was done in Spanish. Some of the official papers that I have from the business are in Spanish. And then there's also the Mexican pesos and Santa Ana and all that kind of jazz here in St. Thomas. Probably contributes to that. Okay. So, anybody know how to pronounce that word? No, this one, Malabrev. I'm sure that's not a good Danish pronunciation, but that's my pronunciation. So, what does that mean?
Measure brief.
Measure brief, yes. It's a deed. And so this is Dronigan's Gata, number 26, Dronigan's Quarter, because remember, there's a Dronigan's Gata in Kangen's Quarter. So you got to keep straight which quarter you're in. But this is an original measure brief, an original deed. And I'm going to bring this up here. So at any rate, this is the first building that Beretta buys. It's on the main street. It's one of these warehouses that extend from the south side of Main Street out to the waterfront. It's 300 feet long, about 26 feet wide, according to the little map here. And those are Danish feet, so it might be a little bit different. But that's his first building on the main street that he bought. The other one that he was in, he was renting. This is what he owns. So this is 1879. The bill of sale. And so this measure brief, this paper is actually a folio. It's folded in half. And you just have this pre-printed on the front. And then as you go along and it gets sold, they just write it in. And they record it in the official protocol. So I'm going to bring a little bit. So this talks about his businesses on the first floor. He's doing grocery items: wine, cheese, olive oil. He's a good Italian. Rice, but he's clothing, shoes. I think it's whatever he can pick up off of the ships that are coming from Europe. And he bids on an auction and sells.
Thank you.
And then Beretta lives in the second story. And by 1880, the year after he buys this, yeah, I think it'll be better if we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're using the bottom there. But...
Take the projector back.
Forward?
It has to be back.
Right there.
That's perfect.
That's perfect.
I'll just sit right here.
Okay.
It's a little crooked now, but is that better?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, the next part of it is I just wanted to kind of hone in on the detail here. This is the bottom part of that deal, the deed, the measure brief. Notice the date, 2nd April 1832. So this is the first part. This is not when Beretta had it, and it came later. But this is the original measure brief. If you look at the signature, C. Hingelberg. Does anybody know who Christian Hingelberg
Yeah.
was?
Yeah.
Map maker, yes. He made the first accurate property map, at least I know of, in Charlemagne. So, you can see he's got it all written out. This is original. So he's got an original drawing on the deed. He's also got for the, and we have pieces of the map, his original map, here. Many years ago, I got copies from. Well, this is the later one. This is a later one. but yeah, the plans, and those are very good for kind of figuring out how these buildings were, and they had a cookhouse or what the deal was. So that's C. Hingelberg, and the initial slide that I did at the beginning, you notice a map of Charlotte Amalia. That's where this comes from. His work. It's based on that. Okay. So we'll go a little bit as far as his kind of personal life. His marriage. Beretta marries a Fontana. So, and she is what we would call a Thomaian Italian. At least that's what the Fontana family called themselves, Thomaian Italian. And so this marriage is in 1882, and you can't really see it well, but here's George Beretta, Eleonora Fontana, and this is a Catholic wedding. These are Catholic records from that are in the Danish archive. They call them Kirkeboger, it's church books. There was the parish record, but then you had to submit it to the Danish authorities. And so this is what was submitted to the Danish authorities. And so a Catholic wedding, but it was done at home. So not common. Yeah. In articulo mortis, at the point of death. She was not only sick, she was near death. And the witnesses, you always look at the witnesses and such. So you've got the priest there to marry them. One of the witnesses is another priest. So this is a job for two priests. And the other is Antonio de Ferrari, is an Italian that he has working for him as a clerk. I mean, it almost seems like they came down Main Street and said, "You got to come and you got to marry her." I think it was fairly quick put together. Why a deathbed marriage? She dies 2 days later. Why? Why would he marry her?
She was pregnant.
He was pregnant.
She had a child already.
She had what?
She already had a child.
Oh, okay.
So they had a child
Yeah.
3 years before. Did it need to be done for legal purposes? No. I think the real reason why, Catholic guilt. Because I don't find this in articulo mortis. I don't find it in the Lutheran records that I've looked through. It's really a Catholic phenomenon. And this page is for the second quarter of 1882, and it has 8 baptisms on it. I truncated it. But of those 8 baptisms, 2 are deathbed marriages. So, and he pays to marry, because she doesn't have a will, she doesn't have any money, but they marry and it becomes joint property. And the tax is about, I think it's 1/2%, 1/2 of 1%. And so we can extrapolate how much his estate was worth. He paid $110, so we multiply that by, my brain is freezing right now, but I think it comes up to about 20,000 is his estate. So he's already doing pretty good by this time. So it's a matter of kind of reading, and I have the receipt. I have a receipt, and have these little odd scraps of paper, but I have the receipt from it. So we fast forward a little bit, a couple of years. There's another Beretta Fontana marriage. Okay? So that happened a lot. If your spouse died, oftentimes you went to, it's a good family, right? So you went to the sibling. So here he is, George Beretta, Victorine Fontana, the sister to Eleanor, and this time there's some friends. But again, it's at home. I'm not sure if I understand at this one. I think she probably insisted on a proper wedding before children kind of thing. At least from kind of what I know from the oral history of her, she was a very proper lady. So I don't know why the ceremony was performed at home, but maybe he had enough pull or whatever. I don't know. And it was done with this L means it was done with a license. It didn't have the bands of marriage performed in church. So 5 children are born into this union. Giorgio, that's my grandfather. Eleonora, who unfortunately, like her namesake, died young. She died in childhood. And then we have Fortunato, Nato, Giulia, and Dante. So my grandfather, my great uncle's aunt. Okay. So the first one, Giorgio, and he was born October 1885. So you do the math, it's okay. Okay, so we're going to go down a little side path here. I told you I was going to talk about the store, but this is Giorgio Beretta, the ship owner. So in 1880, he gets another burger brief, and this one is as a skipsredder, which is a ship owner, and it says it's in addition to his burgerbrev as a merchant, the original one from August 1867. So he extends his burgerbrev. He's got 2 schooners, the Antonio Beretta and the Rosa Beretta. So he names them after his parents. At a later point, he's got another ship. He names the Georgie A.B. So his son is Georgie, and Georgie A. Beretta. And he had a couple other ships. There's kind of Dos Hermanos. So he's using these ships in inter-island trade, Martinique. They're going over to St. Croix, Vieques, Puerto Rico, Santo Domingo. I think even sometimes Cuba. So that brings us to the ship owning. This story I'm going to call Trouble in Haiti, 1894. So there's a little incident in March of 1894. The schooner Antonio Beretta, named for his father, runs into foul weather off of Haiti. They're going for Port-au-Prince. They have some Italian trading partners there. They run into foul weather. They have to pull in to port, and I don't know how you say port, P-A-I-X. Somebody help me with pronunciation.
Hey.
Okay? Okay, Port de Paix in Haiti. So he pulls in. He's got a captain doing this. So they pull in, and basically they are looking to offload the goods because they're getting water damage. The ship is leaking. They send word to Giorgio. He comes over from St. Thomas. And basically the Haitian officials accuse him of smuggling. They seize the ship and the contents. So he stays in Haiti for a couple months, appeals to the Haitian government. They take it through the court, and he doesn't get his ship or his goods back or any payment for it. He goes back to St. Thomas. These ships are Danish ships, so he appeals to the Danish government. Doesn't get any satisfaction that way. He goes to Italy, and in 1894 he has this 14-page manifesto printed up. That's how I know the story, and appeals to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Rome in November of 1894. So I don't know if he ever really got paid. I don't know what the whole thing is because I don't have any kind of documentation on what happened exactly. But basically this international incident put an end to the shipping business. But we do have, in January of 1899, a payment coming from Haiti. So this letter is addressed to G. Beretta Esquire, St. Thomas. It is from I can't read his signature, but he's in charge of the Italian consulate at Port-au-Prince. Sir, having received the second installment of the amount awarded to you by the Haitian government of $5,000 gold, herewith remit to you 3 checks. So he gets $5,000 from the Haitian government. I don't know if, I'm not sure how often that happened, but I suspect that this is payment for his ships and for his ship and the goods that were seized by Haitian officials. So what does he do with the 5,000? He buys Crown House. January he gets the payment, March he buys Crown House and Long Road, the servant quarters that are associated with it. Crown House is up on Government Hill. It's called the Crown House because it was associated with a couple governors, Peter von Scholten being the most noteworthy. But basically it's a nice townhouse mansion on the hill, and he's able to look over the harbor and kind of to be able to monitor kind of the merchant shipping. So that becomes their home. And I have a story about Crown House. I occasionally contribute to a blog. It's by Val Sims and Vintage Virgin Islands, if you Google that. And I have a story about Crown House in the hurricane of 1916. But from this point, they start getting into buying properties. They're buying townhomes to rent. They're basically, from what I read in the newspaper, they buy a townhome, they fix it up, rent it. They bought some more properties on Main Street. In 1906, they buy from the Nunez family. They buy number 27 and 28 Main Street. So he's already got 26. Now he has 26, 27, 28. And he also bought number 7 and 8 Kurosogata. And this is a building that stretches from Kurosogata out to the waterfront. Two-story building. And so this is a list of property. This is my grandfather's writing. This is from about 1918. And so he's writing up about the properties that he's paying taxes on. So we'll go through some of this pretty quickly. This is Hotel Italia. So that big building on Kurosogata, he makes into a hotel. He refurbishes it. He bought it in, actually it was 1908 he bought it. And by 1911, February 1st, his opening day, he's got a hotel. The same day, my grandfather is doing part of the census. So he's a busy man. He's going up and down the street doing census, and he's also looking to open a hotel. It's not only a hotel, this is a burger brief as a innkeeper. So he's got a restaurant as well. There. This is a picture of it. I'm just going to make mention, they also started a cinema there. So an outdoor movie cinema. And they call it Cine Hotelian, cinema of the Hotel Italia. They run silent movies, and first day, who do they have? And they have the band. It's Alton Adams Band. Alton Adams Juvenile Band plays at the cinema, along with the other gigs that they do at Emancipation Park and such.
Where is that? Where is that?
No, they took this building down in 1940. They had bought Inedem Ba, the library, and this building, and they could only restore one. They didn't have the funds, and this one bit the dust, basically.
Didn't they have a fire?
Where was it?
So it's Kurosogata. It's Market Square. Okay. So if you go south of that, it's right south of Market Square. There's an extra little street there.
Lucy's Market.
Yes, Lucy's where Lucy's Market used to be. So they took it down. They put up the building that was Lucy's Market.
Okay, got it.
So that was Hotel Italia. Whole nother story. I'm gonna cut that one short. All right. Who knows? What do you call this envelope? It has a specific name.
Death notice.
Death notice? Yes. Or a mourning cover. A cover is a letter. It's a M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, mourning cover. You know that by the black border. So when you got this in the mail, you knew it was bad news, right? It was, yes. And in the custom, they also continue to So this is in my grandfather's writing. So the guy that we showed the picture of at the very beginning, he wrote to his mother, Mrs. Victorine Beretta, remember Victorine Fontana, and care of Signora Teresa Beretta, widow of Vinelli and Santa Margherita. She's in Italy, and actually this is after my great-grandfather died. She's trying to wrap up some of the loose ends with the Italian relatives for the will. My great-grandfather died in 1912. It's after a long illness. He died at Crown House. The business and all the property passes to his wife, and she remains an undivided estate, but it needs to be, in the Danish law, it really should be divided up at the time to the widow. Half goes to the widow, half to the kids. It gets divided equally. But she's able to retain the whole thing because they went to Italy and got the permission of a daughter who went back to Italy by that time. So she sends this letter out, and again the black border, and it is with deep regret that I announce to you the death of my beloved husband, Mr. George Natal Beretta. I'm going to go through some of this, but I beg to inform you that I have taken over the business, and that same will be continued as heretofore and under the same appellation. Basically, I'm taking over now. We are not out of business. Please continue your patronage. So this is a death letter from my great-grandfather. So this is Victorine Beretta. And this is, in the corner there, that's Crown House. You can see Flag Hill in the background.
Would the roof be Paiwanski's house?
The roof is Paiwanski's house. You are correct. You get the prize. So she's at the helm of the business. Her son is at the helping as well. He's kind of doing the day-to-day operations. Yes, Perseverance. So in here they buy a farm in 1917. What happened with the? I think it's because the cinema was doing really well. But then what happens in 1917 is transfer, right? And then shortly after transfer, Alton Adams and his whole band joins the U.S. Navy. So Mr. Beretta doesn't have his band anymore for his cinema. And then, and I have to confirm this, but I think that the Navy was trying to, in trying to get better relations with the native population, they started playing outdoor movies at the legislature. At least this is what I've heard from somebody. I have not been able to confirm that. But by 1917, by the end of 1917, he's done with the cinema, and he's now moved on to his farm, Perseverance Estate, or Flamingo Pond. So the two ponds there. So a lot of times we hear that Flamingo Pond in the old. So that's an aerial view. So we talk. I'll go through this real quick. Economic stagnation. World War I, 1914 to 1919. Prohibition. Great Depression. World War II. They were relying for their hotel and their Main Street business on visitors. So we had tourists and visitors way back then, even, and so a lot less visitors. And so they ended up having some more difficult times. Trouble in Santo Domingo. So I didn't make mention of this, but when the elder Giorgio Beretta from Italy died in 1912, he had assets of about $120,000. Half was in Santo Domingo, half in St. Thomas. I don't know much about the Santo Domingo part, but I know his property. They had a soap factory. It just was, I mean, I can't keep up with it as far as all what they had going on. But the brother to my grandfather, Nato, went to Santo Domingo in 1912, took over the business there, and by the 1920s it's really having troubles. He lost $25,000 in about 2 years, and so they started liquidating the business in Santo Domingo. St. Thomas G. Beretta needed to cover the debt, And so Giorgio sells off a couple properties, number 2 Sneakelgata to Herman Cricky, or was it Henry? One of the two, Cricky. And then in early March of 1929, he sells off another Main Street building, 8B Main Street. They had a couple buildings on the north side of Main Street as well. So 1930s to 40s, we'll go through quick. My grandfather dies while working at his store. He was serving a tourist off of the ship and collapsed. And they say his last words were, "Mama, I am collapsing." His mother was there. He was there. Another friend, an Italian friend, Vago, who he used to have working at Perseverance Estate. They called over Mr. Francois from there was a Francois store that across the street. So he was at the helm of things, and so he dies fairly young. My dad is 2.5 years old. His mother, Victorine, takes over the business until she dies in 44. The other one of my great uncles that we had in the slide, Dante, dies in 1945. The other great aunt leaves the island in 47. And then, whoa!
Hey.
Hey. Okay. We got to have a little bit of technology here. So he returns from Dominican Republic in 46, and he has some great ideas to make these 3 warehouses that are close together into a big center. And by this time, they have the Main Street stores. They're occupied, they're kept up, but the other parts of the building, going back to the waterfront, is they're in tough shape, and they need a lot of restoration. The waterfront goes in about 1950, the big road. Before then, it was just piers and rocks. So he starts selling off different properties. He sells off Crown House. He sells off, there was a number 2 Main Street. And he also borrows, but he creates this shopping destination, Beretta Center. And it is the 3 warehouses with the alleyways going back to the water. And the whole thing is refurbished, and they had all kinds of different shops. They had the VI Museum there. It started there in the 50s. So he really makes this into a destination. He even advertises in the New York Times. So really the first one to take these old warehouses and rehab them all the way back to the waterfront and make it into kind of a shopping center. So Beretta Center. This is it here. We know it now as the Royal Dane Mall, right? And we got the G. Beretta store, House of Italian Imports. And I think it somewhere says there since 1861. Yeah, since 1861. I'm not sure about that date, but this is the Beretta Center. Troubles start happening as far as he's got loans he has to repay. The original will of 1912 with his father, he still has to satisfy the different branches of the family. And so he starts selling off pieces of the Beretta Center, and I think he finally sold everything in early 60s, satisfied all the heirs except for my father. But my father was kind of a self-made man, and he didn't advocate for it. He just said, I'm going to do things my way, right?
Yep.
Okay. So that's the story of the Beretta Center. Okay. So and this is pretty quick, but basically, after Nato sells everything off, he retains life, an apartment in the upstairs of Beretta Center, and he dies in 1974. Then they change the name to Royal Dane Mall the next year. So the name stayed, and he stayed with the place until that changed. So the Beretta presence on Main Street is a little bit better than 100 years. Now, if we put her shop into the mix. She started in '69, and I don't know how long you went really. I can't figure that out yet. But we kind of look at about 150 years of Beretta presence on Main Street. So, okay. So, let's switch gears. So, remember I told you about my grandmother's family. So, her name was Verna Dinzey. Her mother is Teresa Martis. And so this is not really a Dinzey story. This is going through the maternal line, so we're going to change the names up every time around. So, Teresa Martis is her mother. Her grandmother is Severina McBean. And that's all I have oral history to. I just know Severina was born, was from Western St. Croix. She was Catholic, came over to St. Thomas, was a seamstress. That's the story I got from my grandmother. Well, we found a record from 1857 where we have Severina McBean with her mother, whose name is Lydia Michaels. And they have the last names in this record, but they really don't, for the most part, their first names. And so I followed Lydia back on these records to Estate Mountain in St. Croix, in Western St. Croix. The first record I can find about her is 1835 slave lister. It's not considered the census. The census starts in 1841, but these slave lists go back further. And so I'm going to point out, let's see, she's here, right here, L-Y-D-I, Liddy. And then I'm going to read them down for you, Hester, Louisa. These are a list of girls. So Liddy is age 5, and it's kind of hard to see, but employed on the estate and belonging to the small gang. So already, age 5, she belongs to the small gang. These others who are less than 5 years old, they're incapable of working. But at age 5, you're on the small gang. Yeah. So we follow the records through. She graduates to the big gang. And if we look at here, I'm going to bring a little bit more of a close-up. This talks about the employed on the estate. It's really a hierarchy of different jobs. And so you had the Bamba. This was the enslaved person who was the man, who was basically keeping people in line, making sure the work was done. He got some benefits for that. You had the house servants, right? You had the tradesmen, your blacksmith, your mason, carpenter, cooper. Who knows what a cooper is? Barrel maker, yes. Important on the sugar plantation, right? And then you had the field slaves, the Camina folk, right? And Camina, that's a term that refers to the piece of land that's being worked and the people who work it. And so Liddy is one of the Camina folk. So she is kind of the lowest of the low in this society. And she, not only that, I mean, she's a woman. She grows into a woman, and so she is really kind of the lowest. So I'm going to bring you back then to a little bit later record. This is not a census. This is a mountain and mint estate. These two were contiguous. It's an inventory. And I found this in the U.S. National Archives. And we see the same names. Liddy, Esther, Louisa, Magdalena, Kitty, Ellen. By the way, Liddy, Esther, and Ellen, I figure are sisters. I can't confirm that yet. But they have the same last name. They're all on the same plantation at the 1857 when they actually list them with last names. So, what's that number?
Value of the person.
Value.
Yeah. So, if you go in the heading, it says pieces of 8. There were 100 and so they list, they start with the buildings, the animals, the implements, the windmill, how much was this all valued? And then they have the list of the Negroes. That's the term that they use. 139 people. And number 72 is my great-great-great-grandmother Liddy, and we have that 400. So, yeah, I was going to ask, what is this? This is a tutu, right?
Yep.
So, this tutu was made for me by my brother Patrick. I took it to school with me when I went 17. It made a nice horn at the basketball games, you know. The college I went to had Bahamians, they had their goombay drums, I had my conch horn, right? I had my tutu. And back in that day, I kind of knew it as a symbol of the, when they had fish to sell at market, they would do the tutu. That's what I knew it as. I've carved this thing around with me the whole time since. It was at the 150th anniversary of emancipation here, and I kind of started hearing these stories that this is actually a symbol of freedom, right? July 2nd, 1848, in western St. Croix, the call goes up. They start blowing the conch horn. The year before, there was a program started for amelioration. They were going to do gradually free the slaves. It was going to take 12 years from 1847. And in western St. Croix, they said no. Yes, we're done. So, this is a little something I got from the Royal Danish Library. So they marched down to Frederiksted, and the crowd is put at 6,000 to 8,000, and they demand their freedom. Peter von Scholten is the Governor General of the Danish West Indies. He's in Christiansted. They call for him. He comes down to the fort. Is that Fort Frederick?
Fort Frederick.
Fort Frederick. Thank you. And they let him pass through into the fort unharmed. And he gets up on the ramparts and declares, from this day forth, you're free. Now, do I know if Liddy was there, and her man from later is William McBean? Do I know they're there? No. But I put him into the story because I don't think they just stayed home. It's like, yeah, I'm within walking distance, and I kind of figured they were there, right? This western part of St. Croix is a little bit of a hotbed of rebellion. We'll come back to that. So, the other census records, 1855, here's Lydia with Will. And so again, a lot of times just one name, but there's only one Lydia in this plantation. Actually, there's only 4 or 5 in St. Croix in this time, so it's easy to trace because you know what religion and everything. But Lydia and Will, and then 1857. So she's with Will is William's father, and this is William McBean. In 1857, so just 2 years later, they did another census, and she is with Louis Annal, or I don't know how you say that, but probably from Annalee, Estate Annalee, the name. And so here's Lydia Michaels, William McBean, Severina McBean. Now I'm going to point out here, Lydia, up here, so Will, her partner, is a first-class laborer, right? And she's, I think that's third class? I can't tell, but it's not first. They wrote over it. Why is that? She's expecting. She's expecting Severina, my great-great-grandmother. So she's not listed in this 1855 census, but I found the baptism record for a month afterwards. So she's listed in there, indirectly. Okay. I threw this in gratuitous. This is one of my, if you can have a favorite photographer of the Danish West Indies from the 1870s. This is Everett Schofield. He was a guy who spent quite a bit of time at Mystic Seaport, Connecticut. But he came down, he's an itinerant photographer, 1870s. He came once in 1871, 1877. So this is, and for 1870s, this exposure, he took
Pretty good.
some seconds. This is a great picture, you know, it's spontaneous. He's documenting the life, the plantation life. So not from 1840s, not from the days of slavery, but, and look at these kids. And these are kids. These are boys. No shoes.
Where's this?
This is in St. Croix. So I don't know exactly which plantation in St. Croix. So anybody got any ideas?
Look like
Can
a
figure that
state
out?
Is that sugar cane?
That's sugarcane, I think. Yeah,
It looked like a state slab.
that's what I was wondering. But I don't know my St. Croix estates. But so I'll throw this in, another gratuitous one. This is Hugh Larson painting. This is from a little bit later, 1905, and this is one of my side interests as far as the paintings and such. And I actually, this used to be hanging up in the Grand Galleria for Mikey Kwiatkowski, and then he sold it to the great nephew of the person who painted it. So Hugo Larson painted it, and he sold it to the great nephew. And I actually, this last summer, went and saw the painting in Denmark. So it's a small painting, but very nice. Fireburn, October 1st, 1878. This is the job change day. They were locked, so these field laborers were locked into a contract for a yearly basis. When they were freed in 1848, they weren't freed. They were locked into this labor contract. Leaving the island, there was a number of restrictions. And so what happens with the Fireburn is, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that there was some drunkenness, disorderliness. They took a man into prison custody, they beat him. The rumor went out that he died, and uprising happened. And so we think of Queen Mary, right? Mm-hmm. The Mary Thomas. So here's her statue in Copenhagen, Denmark. It was just dedicated in 2017 for the 100th anniversary. And it's called the I Am Queen Mary statue. Now, if you go to Copenhagen and you look at the statuary, it's all white guys. So this is something different for them. And she is in front of this building here. Was used for the transshipment of goods from St. Thomas to Copenhagen. This is one of the warehouses in Copenhagen. That's me. So, these are the three queens statue in Blackbeard's Hill. So one of the other queens is Matilda McBean. And where's Matilda McBean from? St. Croix, Mountain Estate. Her father's name? William McBean. Now, is my Severina a sister to Matilda? No, I don't think so. It gets complicated. There are at least two William McBeans who are living on contiguous plantations. I can't figure out which one is mine. There was one William McBean from Mountain, and then there was another William McBean from I'm blanking on the name. Walden. It's not Waldenburg. But it's a contiguous plantation. I think my William is from there. So they're both Catholic. They're both about the same age. It's driving me nuts. It's a brick wall. But either they're sisters, or even if they're not sisters, they're probably further out relatives. Even if they aren't relatives, they just have the same last name. They're from the same village. And how many people are in this village? So it really, that's the ties. Do I know if my Severina or Lydia was taking place, it was at Fireburn? No, but they were close, and I know that at least one of their family members or village members were. So I'm writing it into the story. Okay. So what happens after Fireburn? This is 1878. Is Severina leaves St. Croix. So she leaves the plantation life. She's a field laborer. She leaves St. Croix, goes to St. Thomas, becomes a seamstress, and she's working. She's going back and forth. There's about 4 or 5 different trips. She goes back for Christmas to Frederickstead. So my guess is that she was probably visiting family. She spent a couple months. I don't know if she was doing some work or whatever. But my great-grandmother, Mary Teresa Martis, born in 1882, and her father is Henry Martis, who is a guy he's a shoemaker. He came from Curacao about age 7. And so, mother, Severina McBean. If you notice, again, you look at the witnesses, and you have Concepcion Pierre. The importance is that I think Severina died or left the island or something before 1901, because in 1901 census, Mary Teresa Martis, she went by Teresa, is in the census with Concepcion Pierre. So this is the importance of the godparents, right? This is the godparents' job. So Concepcion was taking care of Teresa and her family by that time. This is Teresa Martis. So that's one of the special pictures that I have from the family photos. This was taken by my father, I think sometime in the mid-40s. Of course, nobody wrote anything on these pictures. No dates, nothing. But so I'm going to kind of go off on a little side tangent again. And this goes back to 1901 census. And this is for number 3B and 3D Gambelgata. I've heard some people call it Gambelgata. This old street, yeah. Gambelgata, yes. So I think it depends on how you pronounce things, right? Teresa Martis has her children with Archibald Dinzey. So here's Archibald Dinzey. He's Dutch Reform. He's with Isabella Keating, who he was with at least for 20-odd years. This is for the Keaton family that is now in St. John. They were in St. Thomas first, and they went over kind of the early 1910s. And lists his children, one of his grandchildren. He's in the same household, or right next to, Jacob Henry Adams. Look here, Alton Adams. Alton Adams' mother was Petrina. She was a Dinzey. So Petrina Dinzey and Petrina Adams, Archibald Dinzey, are brother and sister. So, and again, I don't have much of any oral history on my, except that I did visit. I don't know if many of you will remember this lady, Edna Adams. Very instrumental in my genealogy. Got to visit with her many a time. She died when she was 105.
Wow.
And she was sharp. And so she told me about my great-grandfather, Archie Dinzey. She was there the day he died. She telling me that he said, "Oh my God, I'm going to die," and basically he laid down and died. But she was in the household, basically helping with taking care of his children. So I like this record. So This is Alton Adams. So we talked about him being the house band at the Beretta Cinema, playing in Emancipation Park, joining the U.S. Navy, first black U.S. Naval bandmaster. 1924, they take a trip to the Eastern Seaboard, the U.S., and this is in Washington, D.C. This is from the American Memory Collection, the Library of Congress. He's conducting his band for the Secretary of State. So you have a generation here who is advancing. His father was a carpenter. He was living in this household. His uncle was a tailor. We come to this is my grandmother, Miss Verna Dinzey. This is her brother, Vern Dinzey. So I told you, Teresa Martes and Archie Dinzey. This is their children. She was born in 1907. He was born in 1909. And I'm going to read you what the kind of description. So nothing written on these pictures, but they were sent to my Uncle Ivan, my great Uncle Ivan. So Miss Verna had an older brother whose name was Ivan. Same mother, different father. He went to New York. And so I'm going to read what he had to say. So this is photos from Vern and Verna, my dear sister and brother. These were my birthday present for that year, 1925. I had looked forward to have them both join me in America and to continue their studies. I'm going to scroll. I can't scroll. Okay, but basically, I think it says sister was interested in dentistry, and brother was interested in literature and history. He wanted to bring them up to get high school education, because what they had was 6th grade education. That was about the equivalent that they had. The 6th reader is what they call it. Well, Vern, this is in 1925. This is this picture. These pictures were taken as a birthday gift for Uncle Ivan, for her brother Ivan. I call him Uncle Ivan, and I can't do his voice either. I met him when I was a kid, and he was by that time he's old. He had a gravelly voice and a nice accent. I can't do it. But Vern dies within a few months after this picture is taken. Pneumonia. And I don't think that the family has money. This is the 20s. And so she doesn't get to go on to do her studies. But she does end up working with a dentist. And kind of learns a lot, is on the job training. And she ends up being, the Islanders called her Nursey. And so I have a story about this that I put in the St. John's Historical Society, because she used to go to St. John every year as basically as a dental nurse. But I've had people tell me stories that they used to hide out and wait for the dentist to leave, and they'd go in and have Miss Verna do their extraction. So, at some point, she switches back to her original job as seamstress. She did piecework for Elver Hoy and this type of thing. Yeah. This is her dental tools. And I remember her chasing after me. Pliers. Oh, you got a loose tooth? Come, let me see. And so the first time it was come, let me see, she'd yank it up. Right? The second time, though, you got smart to this, and you'd be running. And she'd be running after you with the pliers. That was Miss Verna. So here we are, back to my paternal grandparents. I don't know the story of how they got together, but I figured that they're both good-looking people and they were attracted to one another, and there we go. I don't have a better story. But when I asked her, my grandmother, well, when did you get married? Initially, when I started out, it was all about dates, right? When you were born, when you're married, when you die. Okay, yeah, fine. So I asked her when she was married, and I don't remember. How you cannot remember your marriage date? And I was, 10, 12, and so I keep asking her, and finally she said I wasn't married. And I was like, well, oh. But she said it wasn't the custom in those days. So many years after I've been looking at all of these illegitimate births or whatever, and it wasn't the custom in those days, for what it's worth. This is their kid. My father, George Antonio Beretta. And this is badly damaged. You got hurricane damage. That's part of the history of these pictures and such, right? I'm just going to take some things through pretty quickly here. This is him. So this is George Beretta, his brother, Teddy. This is Ma Teresa, my great-grandmother, and Miss Verna Dinzey. So this is 3 generations. This is one of my favorite pictures in a whole lot of my family history. And I'll make mention of, I have a daughter she's 20, and she thinks that selfies were kind of invented 5-10 years ago. And she thinks she's the expert and I can't do selfies and nobody can do selfies. This is a selfie. This is my dad. He set it up on the tripod. He was interested in photography back in the mid-40s. So it's one of my favorite pictures from that family. We'll take it through to 1965. So my dad went off to college in Minnesota, and then he went to medical school and finished that out. He got married. His first wife died. He got drafted into the Army about that time. Went to Alabama, met her. He left her, came back to St. Thomas in 1957, and basically Miss Verna kicked him back off and said, go marry the girl in your wallet. He went to New York City, go practice your chemistry, right?
And marry the girl in your wallet.
They went to Chicago and got married and had 3 kids in Chicago, came back to St. Thomas in 1964. So she's been here for 55 years. Right?
Yep.
And later in 64, I'm born. And so this little blonde-haired cute kid, that's me. That was in my blonde days. This is my oldest brother, Michael, who unfortunately passed away in 1973, motorcycle accident. But this is, again, one of my favorite, again, it's George Beretta is the photographer, right? He set it up on a tripod.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's set up on a tripod. This is all set. The Heineken, not the Heineken, Budweiser bottles. You remember that? That's Beretta Center. Yeah, that's the other part of this.
And the girl?
So that's Barbara, Patrick, me, Michael.
Yay.
So this is 2008. And I think I'm going to close with it. I don't know if Gigi, you remember?
Yeah.
You remember Granny and her storytelling?
Yeah.
Right. And so it'd be in the parlor or on the porch or whatever. But sometimes we went to this little park between the lieutenant governor's office and
Oh, yeah. I
and
do remember
the
park.
government house is like a little private park, but she'd kind of sneak in there and
Behind the
steal in there.
Lutheran church?
Behind the Lutheran church. But it's not that one. It's up a little bit. It was kind of a private thing.
Yeah.
So she would go and tell us stories and riddles. We would look at the moon. We would look at the stars. When she finished out the story, she would say, "Wheel bend, story end."
This inquiry.
So, my thanks to Miss Verna for giving me this wonderful heritage. And we'll bend, story end.